Hello, how are you today? Are you okay? I'm back again here today to talk about sports. Yes, we're going to continue talking about the topic of sports. And I want to go down, directly to the homework that we had left, in our previous lesson. And maybe you remember it was about, the combination of passive voice and present perfect. Now we're going to, to watch the homework. But before that, I have here the topics we're going to be dealing with today in our lesson. So these are today's topic. We're going to be talking about a short history of the Olympic Games, and then we're going to be talking about the Olympic symbols. All right? These are going to be today's topics. Before we go into the topics, as I said before, we're going to check the homework. Okay? So you had to translate into English 3 sentences that I gave you in Spanish. Remember? And there was a combination here of the passive voice and also, of course, combined with the present perfect. Let's see now on the screen the homework that we left in our previous lesson. All right? There was an example here having to do with baseball. Actually, there were 2 baseball, let's say, sentences here. Number 1 is, el béisbol ha sido excluido del programa olímpico para Londres 2012. Es algo que ya supongo que muchos conocemos. And you had to use the verb to exclude. And then, that is the answer. Baseball has been excluded from the Olympic program in London 2012. This is what is going to happen at the Olympic Games in London in 2 years from now. So again, look at the example here. Has been excluded. All right? We know it is present perfect because we're using has. We know that it is passive voice because we're using been plus a participle. All right? So that is the answer to one of the 3 items you had to deal with as homework, from our previous lesson. Number 2 is, lo han ponchado 3 veces en este juego. And I gave you the verb to strike out. So it would be like this. He has been struck out 3 times in this game. So you know that strike is the present tense, strike out is present, and struck out, in this case, is a participle that you would use here, to talk about a baseball player who's been struck out 3 times in this game. And number 3, this one had to do with the Olympic Games. The Olympic Games, and we said here in Spanish que los Juegos Olímpicos nunca se han celebrado en África. All right? So the Olympic Games have never been held in Africa. And here we have 2 important, let's say, things to say. Number 1 is where to put never in this context. And it goes like this. Have never been. So you would insert never between have and been. So again, the Olympic Games have never been held in Africa. All right? So let us now go on with information about the Olympic Games. You know that when we talk about multi-sport games, we talk about the Olympics. It is the event that is, awaited by a lot of people for 4 years. And everyone in Cuba, for example, would like to be on vacation during the Olympics because then we can see on television all of the events, coming from wherever the games are held. But I have here information about the Olympic Games, about the origin of the Olympic Games. Maybe you want to see that on the screen now. All right? So the Olympic Games originally, that the ancient Olympic Games were held in Olympia, Greece. And look again at the use of were held. Okay? Se celebraron is passive voice again here. We're talking about the Olympics, and we're saying that the Olympics were held initially in Olympia, Greece. From the 8th century BC, and I have underlined BC because I'm going to talk about it in a few seconds, to the 5th century AD. So it is BC, AD here contrasted. I mean, we have here information that I'm going to be talking about in a few seconds about the equivalence in Spanish of BC and AD. Baron Pierre de Coubertin founded the International Olympic Committee, the IOC, in 1894. And I have underlined the word founded because here founded is important. It is important to know the meaning of founded here because if you make a mistake in, let's say, in determining or in understanding the meaning of found, you may have, of course, the wrong impression about the real meaning of a sentence. So, again, I'm going to talk about founded in a few seconds. So, the IOC has since become the governing body of the Olympic movement, whose structure and actions are defined by the Olympic Charter. ¿Ok? Aquí nos da un poco una idea sobre qué son los Juegos Olímpicos, de cuándo surgen los Juegos Olímpicos, y hablaremos dentro de un rato también sobre la historia de los Juegos Olímpicos. Yo quiero decirle, y se lo quiero explicar en español, que nosotros no estamos dando un curso sobre deportes y utilizamos el inglés para que usted aprenda de deportes. No es exactamente así. Se trata de un curso de inglés en el que usted tiene, por supuesto, para poder apropiarse de vocabulario, de determinadas estructuras gramaticales que son propias del lenguaje que se utiliza para hablar de deporte, pues tendremos que, por supuesto, dar información deportiva. Yo no soy un experto, por supuesto, en deporte, pero hemos hecho un esfuerzo para que usted pueda aprender el inglés que se relaciona con los deportes de una manera amena, en la misma manera en que va aprendiendo un poco más quizás acerca del deporte en sí mismo. Quizás para algunos de ustedes esta información que daremos hoy es conocida. Qué bueno, porque así podrán entonces entenderla mejor en inglés y ya tienen un referente en español anterior. Okay? So now I want to explain to you why I have underlined the words that I underlined in the previous paragraph, all right? First of all, BC. And BC means antes de nuestra era. Tenemos en inglés a la izquierda y a la derecha tenemos la equivalencia en español. And BC means before Christ. I think all of you know that when we say before Christ, we're talking about the time when Christ was born. All right? And for that reason, we say in English BC. In Spanish, we use antes de nuestra era, A-N-E. Then AD, we use here Latin. That is Anno Domini. Okay, AD means, after Christ. Okay, that's what it would mean. And we use in Spanish, nuestra era. So it is good to know this because when you're reading, not only about sports, but reading about history in general, you would need to know what BC and AD, mean in order to understand, what we're talking about in terms of time in history, all right? So then we have the verb found. And many people make mistakes, when they want to use find and found because people believe we're using the same verb, and that is not so. I mean, found is a verb in itself, meaning fundar. It is a regular verb, so we use found, founded, founded. That's the reason why in what you read a few seconds ago, you found the verb found, and then it was used like founded. Fue fundado, okay? So the International Olympic Committee was founded in 1894, okay? And I want to contrast found with find, and look back now at the screen. We have also the verb to find, whose past tense and participle are found. So you see, found is the present of fundar, and found is the past and the participle of encontrar. All right? The word body here does not mean cuerpo, it means organismo. We're talking about international bodies, son organismos internacionales, not only in sports, but in all kinds of, let's say, of spheres of society, like, for example, politics or science, And then we have the word whose. This is a very common mistake. Muchas personas cuando van a escribir o hablan en inglés y van a decir cuyo, o sea, van a hacer referencia a posesivo, equivocadamente utilizan la palabra which, y no es la palabra que se utiliza. La palabra que se utiliza tanto para personas como para objetos, para todo, en este caso para un organismo internacional, para referirse a esa posesión, es decir, cuyo, cuya, cuyos, cuyas, es la palabra whose in English. Maybe I want to show you back, the paragraph. Look at this. Whose structure, quiere decir la estructura del movimiento olímpico, o sea, del Comité Olímpico Internacional, perdón, la estructura del Comité Olímpico Internacional y sus acciones, sus actividades está definida por la Carta Olímpica. Okay? So that is what I wanted to show. Now I want to show you here the Olympic symbols. And I'm going to talk only in English now because I'm not going to be teaching any specific item of language. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to just, be talking to you about sports in general. And I want you to just try to imagine you're watching like a documentary about the Olympic Games, all in English. There is no Spanish, and you need to be able to understand. All right? So here we have the Olympic symbols, and the first one is the Olympic flag. Look at the beautiful flag here. And it has another very important symbol, which is the Olympic rings. All right? So we have here the Olympic rings. We have the flag, and there are 5 rings. 5 rings in the flag, and each of these rings, stands for one of the continents: Africa, Europe, Asia, America, and Oceania. So then we have here the 5 continents in 5 different colors. And the reason why we have 5 different colors is because these colors are found, at least one of them is found in each of the flags of all the countries belonging to the International Olympic Committee. All right? That's why we have 5 different rings with different colors. Okay? Then we have the so-called Olympic Creed. This is just like the most important idea, the philosophy behind the Olympic Games. Okay? And I want you to take a look now at the screen. I think it's very important you watch the screen now, because we have here the philosophy behind the Olympic movement. The most important thing in the Olympic Games is not to win, but to take part. So we have a contrast here. But, the word but is important. It's not to win, but to take part. Just as the most important thing in life is not the triumph, but the struggle. Maybe you never win, but you struggle. Okay? Struggle means luchar. Okay? The essential thing is not to have conquered, but to have fought well. So, to conquer and to fight well. And here we have underlined the word but. Look at the screen. The word but has been underlined in the 3 cases. It appears here in this creed. 3 times the word but. Okay? And the word but here is indicating a contrast. Okay? And we have here a contrast between winning and taking part. If you don't win, it doesn't matter. But you need to take part. Take part, meaning tomar parte, to participate. It's a synonym. And then we have winning, which is the gerund for win, the verb ganar. And we said in our previous lesson here that we were going to talk here about, winning and losing in sports. And today we're talking about winning, all right? Maybe later we're going to talk about losing as well. Okay, so then going back to the screen, we have here winning versus taking part. We also have here the contrast between triumph and struggle. Triumph, similar to Spanish. I don't think I need to say, the meaning of this word in Spanish. And then we have the last contrast, that is between conquering and fighting well. To conquer, also similar to Spanish, and to fight, luchar, pelear, to fight well. Now, the word but here is establishing a contrast between these 2 words. And in Spanish, we would say sino. All right? So, lo importante en los Juegos Olímpicos no es ganar, sino participar. And you would apply the same sino to the next 3, the next 2 examples we have here in the same paragraph. Okay? So it is important to know the meaning of but here, which it doesn't mean pero, it means sino. All right? So that's another meaning of the same word in English. Word in English. Okay? Then we come to the Olympic motto. All right? Look at the screen now. The Olympic motto. And what is the meaning of motto? Es el lema. El lema de los Juegos Olímpicos. The Olympic motto is Citius, Altius, Fortius. It's a Latin expression. And it means, in English, faster, higher, stronger. And look at the use of the comparative here. Faster, higher, stronger. They come from fast, high, strong. And in order to make these 3 adjectives, look like, there's a higher level in the achievement or in the performance of the competitors, we use the ER at the end to express this comparison. Faster, higher, stronger. In Latin, it would be Citius, Altius, Fortius, all right? That's the slogan, the motto of the Olympic Games. And then we have the Olympic flame, the beautiful Olympic flame. At many Olympic Games, there's always a lot of excitement about how the how the flame, will be lighted, by whoever. You know that in Barcelona, for example, it was an archer who shot an arrow and then he lit, the torch. The flame. In China, in Beijing, 2 years ago, you saw how it was, how it was carried out, how it happened, and it was also very beautiful. There's always a new way of doing so, and that is because the Olympic flame, the lighting of the flame is one of the most important events at the opening ceremonies of any Olympic Games or any multi-sport games around the world. Okay? Now you're going to watch a video, and in this video you're going to watch, you will see, part of the opening ceremonies of the Olympic Games in Athens, in the year 2004. And in this part of a video, you will learn about the history of the Olympic Games from the beginning, in our modern times until the present time. Of course, you will not see any information about the Olympic Games to be held later because, of course, it was not possible to know, but it will go until the year 2004. So what you have to do now is just enjoy this part of the opening ceremonies. There's no task for you, and I'm going to come back later to talk about what you saw. Okay, come on, let's watch the video.
1896, Athens. 1900, Paris. 1904, St. Louis. 1908, London. 1912, Stockholm. World War I. 1920, Antwerp. 1924, Paris. 1928, Amsterdam. 1932, Los Angeles. 1936, Berlin. World War II. 1948, London. 1952, Helsinki. 1956, Melbourne. 1960, Rome. 1964, Tokyo. 1968, Mexico City. 1972, Munich. 1976, Montreal. 1980, Moscow. 1984, Los Angeles. 1988, Seoul. 1992, Barcelona. 1996, Atlanta. 2000, Sydney. 2004.
So that was like, retelling the story of the Olympics. What happened when they were first held some years ago until the present time. That was, again, the opening ceremonies of the Olympic Games in Athens 2004. You know that the opening ceremonies are just, one of the most interesting parts, most exciting parts of the Games. And most of us have enjoyed, watching the opening ceremonies of the most recent Olympic Games in the last few years. All right? So what we're going to do now is we're going to go over this history in more detail, and I want to give you a task because I want you to just profit from this. I want you to learn English, but at the same time I want you to learn more about international sports, about the history of the Olympic Games, and for that reason I want to give you the following task. Look at this. Come on, look at the task on the screen. I'm going to give you now 4 questions. And I need you to answer these 4 questions, as you listen to me when I talk about the Olympic Games in the next few minutes. You have to answer the following 4 questions. Number 1 is, how many times have the Summer Olympic Games been held in a Spanish-speaking country? Some of you may not need to listen to me in English to answer this question. I know that. But I think it would be nice, to lead you along this process of listening, for a certain purpose. Okay? Go back again. So number one is, how many times have the Summer Olympic Games been held in a Spanish-speaking country? All right? And I say the Summer Olympic Games because we have also the Winter Olympic Games. But today I won't talk about the Winter Games. I'm going to talk only about the Summer Games. All right? So I want you to copy as I talk. All right? So number two is, which country, and there's only one, has hosted the Summer Olympic Games 4 times? Hosted meaning ha sido sede. O sea, ¿qué país ha sido sede? Which country has hosted the Summer Olympic Games 4 times? Number 3, when have the Olympic Games been held in Asia? This is one of the 5 continents we talked about a few minutes ago. And the games have been held there sometimes, several times. And I wanted to just, be able to identify how many times and when they were held in Asia, or they've been held in Asia. Much better. And number 4, will the 2012 games be organized by a country which has held the games before? That's question number 4. So you have 4 questions. And I want to give you now 1 more minute to finish copying the task. Come on, look at the screen now and copy the task. Come on. I know that if you're watching this lesson today, it is because you have 2 goals in mind. One goal is to learn English, and number 2, it is to learn more about sports around the world. And, the combination of the 2 things, of the 2 goals, that is to learn about sports by using English and to learn more English by talking about sports. And for that reason, I have brought today like a history of the Olympic Games, year by year. That the games are held every 4 years. So we're going to know what happened every 4 years beginning in the year 1896. So the first games were held in the year 1896 in Athens, Greece. And I want to show you now, this picture here is a picture of the Panathinaikos Stadium in Athens. Look at the stadium. This stadium was used at the Olympic Games in Athens for the opening ceremonies of the games. But I have a very, let's say, interesting piece of news for you, and that is that this stadium is still being used in Athens, in Greece. I'm going to show you later another picture of the same stadium, 6 years ago at the Olympic Games in 2004. Let's go back to the picture now. Look at the picture here. Here we have some sports being played here during the 1896 Olympic Games in Athens. As we said before, that the Olympic Committee, the International Olympic Committee, had been founded in the year 1894, and it was only 2 years after that that the Olympic Games, the first Olympic Games, were held in Athens in the year 1896. Okay? So the next games were held in Paris. Paris, the year 1900. And some of you may know that games held in Paris, they were very long. Now, at present, the Olympic Games are held for 2 weeks, maximum maybe 20 days. But in the early games, 1896, the year 1900, 1904, the games were longer in time. Sometimes the games lasted for about 6 months. So different sports had their own competitions at different times along the year. Now, as I said before, it's different. All the games are held simultaneously. In a 17-day, let's say, schedule or program. and we have all the sports together, which makes, of course, this fact makes us, the Olympic Games much more exciting, much more interesting, because they're followed by the media, by spectators around the world. This is now much, I would say, much more exciting. The 1904 Games were supposed to be held in Chicago in the United States of America. But for some reason, these games were canceled. Chicago would not be able to organize the games. And then it was St. Louis, Missouri, the city that organized, that hosted the games in the year 1904. This was, the first time that the games were held in the United States. Okay? Now, 1908, London was the city that, hosted the games. And we see here a picture of women competing in archery. Archery was one of the first sports in which women participated at the Olympic Games. This sport was held here, was part of the games in 1908, and later on until 1920. And we'll talk some other days, in some of our lessons, we'll talk more about this sport. 1912, the games were held in Stockholm, right, in Sweden. So again, another first time. And it was the first time that the games were held in a country in Scandinavia. So Sweden organized the 1912 games, and this was the last time, these were the last games before the First World War. So there were no games in 1916. The games that were going to be held in 1916 in Berlin, Germany, were canceled. And I'm going to write on the board how we say this. The games were canceled. So the 1916 games were canceled. They were not held because of the First World War. So we here have on the screen, on the board, an example of passive voice. We have another example of passive voice talking about the Olympic Games, and we're saying here that the games were canceled in 1916 due to the First World War. Then the games came back again in 1920, and these games were held in Belgium, in a city called Antwerp in Belgium. En español se diría Amberes. That would be the name in Spanish for this city. So Antwerp was the city that organized the games in 1920, and then in 1924 the games came back to Paris in France. So we can see here a picture of the opening parade of the Olympic Games in 1924 in France, in Paris. Okay? 1928, they were again held in Europe, and it was Amsterdam, the capital of Netherlands, the city that organized, that hosted the games in 1928. I've been using the words organized, hosted, the city in which the games were held several times. This is language for you to learn. How we say in English, se organizaron, se celebraron, fue la sede de. This is language you need to learn from this lesson. Going back to the screen again, 1928, Amsterdam, was the host city of the 1928 games. And then 1932, Los Angeles in the United States. Look at the stadium where the games were opened in 1932. Same stadium where the games were opened in 1984, 52 years later. All right? So, games in 1932. Now, for those of you who know about history, Germany was going through a political process that had an influence on the organization of the 1936 games in Berlin. And you will see here in the picture that we have lots of flags, lots of Nazi flags, in the opening ceremonies of the games. There's a runner here with a torch, with a flame, of the Olympic Games. And there are many, many flags with a symbol of Nazism in Germany in 1936. And this was the last time before the Second World War that the Olympic Games were held. In 1940, that is 4 years after the Olympic Games in Berlin, the games were not held. They were canceled again, as we can see here on the screen. But then it was not in 1916, but in 1940, the games that were supposed to be held in Japan were canceled. So Japan would not be able to organize the Olympics because the war had begun 1 year before. The same happened in 1944 with the games that were going to be held in London. London was the city that had been chosen to organize the 1944 games, and due to the war, the games were not held. And then they needed to wait another 4 years until 1948 to host the Olympic Games in London again. So the Olympic Games were not held in 1940 and 1944, and they came back in 1948. Here we have part of the competition, women's competition here in running, and it was raining, as you can see here. Then 1952, we have a picture of the lighting of the flame at the Olympics in Helsinki, Finland. Once again in Scandinavia. The games came back to Scandinavia in 1952. 1956, the games went for the first time to Australia. And this is a picture. As you can see, we have a lot of black and white pictures because, you know, they date back to the time when we had no color pictures. This is the opening ceremonies of the 1956 Olympic Games in Melbourne, Australia. 1960, and here we have a picture of one of the most famous runners ever in the world. Her name was Wilma Rudolph. She was the winner here of 3 gold medals. She won the gold medal in the 100-meter competition. Again, she won the 200-meter competition, and she won the gold medal in the relay. Okay, and I'm going to write on the board the word relay. El relevo, relay. So she won 3 gold medals. Her name was Wilma Rudolph. She was an American sprinter who participated in 2 Olympic Games in 1956 and then in 1960, and she won 4 medals. So she medaled 4 times. To medal as a verb. Esto es un verbo que significa ganar medallas. To medal. So she medaled 4 times at the Olympic Games. A bronze medal in the relay in 1956, and then she won 3 gold medals at the Olympics in 1960 in Italy, in Rome. All right? That's Wilma Rudolph, right? A very, very well-known sprinter of the United States. Then 1964, the games in Japan, in Tokyo. And in these games, Cuba won a very important medal in athletics. Enrique Figueroa won the silver medal at the competition, at the 100-meter competition in the Olympic Games in '64 in Tokyo. Then, for the first time, the games came to Latin America. And it was Mexico in the year 1968 that organized the Olympic Games. Mexico City, a city that is quite famous because of its height. You know, it's as compared to the sea level, Mexico is very high, and for that reason, many, many records were set there. Many Olympic records were broken in Mexico City in 1968, but I would say that the most important one, that, you know, the record that remained for many, many years was the one set by Bob Beamon, a long jumper from the United States. He set a world record of 8 meters and 90 centimeters, 890. That was the record, world record. This is 8 meters and 90 centimeters was a world record in the long jump, en el salto largo, the long jump, and it was set by Bob Beamon. Let me write his name on the board. Bob Beamon from the United States. He was the record holder, the record breaker there in Mexico City in 1968. And we have a picture here of his award ceremony in Mexico City. And then 1972 Olympic Games in Germany, in Munich. First time after 1959, Cuba winning gold medals. And that was the 3 gold medals that were won by our 3 boxers. Cuba won 3 gold medals there. You know, they were won by Orlando Martinez, Emilio Correa, and Teófilo Stevenson. They were the 3 gold medalists of the Cuban delegation at the Olympic Games in Munich. And there was also a very important medal won by the Cuban basketball team. They won the bronze medal in the men's basketball competition. And then 1976. We can't talk about 1976 before, if we don't talk about Alberto Juan Torena. Alberto Juan Torena was the winner of 2 gold medals at the Olympic Games in Montreal, Canada. Look at him here winning the gold medal in the 800-meter competition there in Montreal. Many of us, of course, remember this. It was a very important event in the history of Cuban sports, 1976, Montreal, Canada. Then, 1980, the Games went to Moscow in the Soviet Union. Moscow in the Soviet Union, and here we have the winner of the 1500 competition, Stephen Ovett from Great Britain. He won the gold medal here in Moscow 1980. 1984, here we have a legend. The Olympic Games in Los Angeles in the United States, and we have a legend here is Carl Lewis. Carl Lewis, who won a lot of medals in the Olympic Games, a lot of gold medals in the Olympic Games in several events, the relay, the long jump, the 100-meter dash. So he was, you know, in the 1980s, I would say he was the best competitor in athletics around the world. So, again, a picture of Los Angeles 84 with Carl Lewis, an American athlete, a very well-known American athlete. Now, Carl Lewis came back again to the Olympics in 1988. And in 1988, the Games went to Seoul in Korea. And here we have a picture which I think is historical. Look at this picture here. We have here Ben Johnson from Canada. Ben Johnson apparently winning the gold medal, defeating Carl Lewis. If you look at the picture, you will see that Ben Johnson is raising his hand, showing that he's number 1. And then there's Carl Lewis with the number 1102 back there. And Carl Lewis was supposed to be second, according to what we saw on the track. But then there was a problem. Ben Johnson was disqualified because of doping. He was found to be positive in doping. And then, for that reason, he lost the gold medal that he had won. I mean, he had apparently won in this competition in which he cheated. I mean, he was found guilty of doping, and so he lost his gold medal. He was disqualified. And we used this word before in our previous lesson. So we're here now in 1988 at the Seoul Olympics, and then 1992. Cuba won a lot of gold medals in Barcelona, the venue of the 1992 Olympic Games, and Cuba ranked number 4 among all the countries participating in the competition. I want to say it again. Barcelona, and I want to show you a picture of Barcelona. This is Barcelona, the famous lighting of the flame in Barcelona. Well known, I'm sure all of you saw this. And in Barcelona, Cuba had a lot of success at the Olympics. Most of our, I mean, we won medals, gold medals in many, many sports. Then the Games went to Atlanta. Atlanta, 1996, in the United States. And here we have a Cuban wrestler. A Cuban wrestler, his name is Filiberto Asqui. He was a gold medalist at the Olympic Games in 1996 in Atlanta. He was said to be like a crane. And what is a crane? A crane es una grúa. Most of these specialists in wrestling said that Asqui was like a crane because he was able to lift. He was so strong that he was able to lift his opponents many times And for that reason, he won the gold medal at the Olympic Games in 1996 in Atlanta, and then again 4 years later at the Olympic Games in Sydney in Australia. So here we have on the screen, we have two very important moments at the Olympic Games in Sydney, Australia in the year 2000. There's Ivan Pedroso winning the gold medal in the long jump in his last jump. And then there's the Cuban women's volleyball team defeating Russia in 5 sets. The Russians had won the first 2 sets, and the Cubans came back to win the other 3. That was a very important event in the history of Cuban sports, because our women's team had won the gold medal in Barcelona, in Atlanta, and again in Sydney. All right? So 2004, the games came back to Athens. And you can see here on your left, you can see the same Panathinaikos Stadium that you saw at the beginning in 1896. Now, this stadium was used for the archery competition of the Olympic Games and also for the finals of the marathon in athletics. So, the same stadium, of course, it was rebuilt, it was restored, and then it was used again for the Olympic Games 108 years later. All right? And then we see on the right one of the Cuban gold medalists in the games, Oslady Menendez, who won the gold medal in the javelin throw competition, in the women's javelin throw competition. Now, the games in 2008 went to Beijing, China. The games went to Beijing in China. And here we have a picture of the opening ceremonies of the famous stadium, the Bird's Nest. All right? That is the name of the stadium. El Nido del Pájaro. Okay, that was the name of the stadium. Let me improve this so you can see better. Okay, the bird's nest because it resembles, the shape of a nest. And for that reason, it was called the Bird's Nest in Beijing. So, 2008 Olympic Games in Berlin. As you can see here, these games were famous because of the wonderful facilities that were built. The Chinese organized, they put together a wonderful Olympic Games. They organized everything perfectly. And, besides this, besides the organization in terms of, technical aspects and all that, the Chinese people were very kind to all the participants, all the visitors who were in Beijing for the Olympics and then for the Paralympics a month later. We have come so far to the Olympics we have had so far. But what is going to happen in 4 years? And that is, I think, the answer, or that is going to help you answer the 4th question that I gave you, right? We have the Olympic Games in London, Great Britain in the year 2012. Here we have the logo of the Olympics. It's a beautiful logo in pink and blue. And we also have pictures which have been, let's say, published to sort of like show that we have sports events and we have London. So you can see here in the picture parts of London, lots of places that are famous or that make London a famous place around the world, and you see competitors taking part in events in the background of these beautiful places in London. So the games in London in the year 2012. And though we don't have it here, you know that the games in 2016 will be held in Brazil, in Rio. So Rio has been awarded the organization of the Olympic Games in the year 2016. Are you ready now to answer the questions that I gave you? I'm sure you are, because we went through all this history of the games, and I'm sure now you can tell me whether you can tell me the answers to the questions. The first question was, how many times have the Summer Olympic Games been held in a Spanish-speaking country? And the answer is twice. Fíjense la palabra twice, que significa dos veces. Okay? We have the word once and the word twice. So once, una vez, twice, dos veces. Once, twice. And the word once is also used when we're telling a story. Like when you say in English, once upon a time, que sería en español, había una vez. When you're telling a story, is once upon a time, there was a young lady. If you're going to talk about the story of Cinderella, or any of those, stories that we listened to when we were kids. So once and twice, una vez, dos veces. So how many times have the Olympic Games been held in a Spanish-speaking country? Twice. First in Mexico in 1968, and then where? In Spain. In beautiful Barcelona in the year 1992. So these have been the only two times in which the Olympics have been held in a country in which Spanish is the first language. All right? Then, second question. And number two goes like this. Which country has hosted the Summer Olympic Games 4 times? And the country has been the United States. All right? The United States of America, because the games have been held there 4 times. First time was in St. Louis in the year 1904, many, many years ago. Then Los Angeles in 1932, and in 1984, Los Angeles in California. 52 years after the games were held in Los Angeles for the first time, they came back to Los Angeles, the so-called Centennial Games. Maybe you remember, there was a lot of problems with these games because Greece wanted to have the games after 100 years, but they lost, this bidding for the Olympics in the year 1996 to Los Angeles in the United States. Then Greece came back for 8 years later, So then Los Angeles twice, 1932 and 1984, and then in Atlanta in the year 1996. So, I'm sorry, I made a little mistake here. It was not Los Angeles, it was Atlanta 96, that was fighting versus Greece for the Olympic Games in the year 1996. It was a little mistake, but I'm sure you understood what I said, and there's no problem. So again, 4 times in the U.S., and it was the games in Atlanta 96 that the Greek people wanted to have, and they were not able to get them because Atlanta won, the struggle for the Olympics. Then we go to the third question. And question 3 is, when have the Olympic Games been held in Asia? And it's been how many times? 3 times. 3 times. The first time was in Tokyo, 1964. Then 1988 in Seoul, Korea. And now in the year 2008 in Beijing, China. So there was a 24-year gap between the first games in Tokyo and then the next games in Seoul, Korea. And then 20 years later, they went back to China. I think that China deserved to have the games. And again, I want to say that besides the wonderful organization, the Chinese did a wonderful job also as competitors in the games because they won most of the gold medals there. And then number 4, will the 2012 games be organized by a city which has held the games before? Yes or no? Yes, of course. London organized the Olympic Games in 1908 and then in 1948. So 40 years between the first and the second games in London, and now it will be another 64 years after the second games in which now London will organize the Olympic Games once again. We're all looking forward to the games. I'm sure all of you are also looking forward to the new Olympic Games, to the upcoming Olympic Games, because we'll have the chance to, see our Cuban players, our Cuban competitors taking part in another important international event. And we Cubans are very, very much, fond of sports, all sports, mainly baseball, I know. And we'll talk about baseball one of these days here in our lessons. We're going to dedicate, a lesson to talking about baseball, and we're going to also talk about some other sports. Before we go today, I want to just go over some language that we've been dealing with today. This is some language, some, vocabulary we learned today. We have the creed when we talked about, what is behind, the philosophy behind the games. Like, it's better to take part, you don't need to win to be happy, but if you take part and you compete and you fight well, you will be successful. Then we have the motto, Sitius Altius Fortius, you know that? Flame, la llama. To found as a verb, BCAD. These two acronyms I think are important, but with the meaning of sino in Spanish. Host, that is, to host the games means ser sede de los juegos. So we talked today about many cities which have hosted the games since 1896. The verbs win and lose as opposites. The adjective disqualified when we talked about Ben Johnson of the Olympics in 1988 in Seoul, Korea. The word cancel, and then canceled in the past, it's the way we talk about, for example, when we talk about the games in 1916, 1940, and 1944, they were all canceled because of the wars. And last but not least important is the verb to medal, that is to win medals. All right? I suppose that you have learned today a little bit about about the Olympic Games, but also you've learned some English as well. I think it's important that we establish this relationship. And what we said before, in our previous lesson, some days ago, we said that English is important for international sports. And today we have tried to just, show you a bit of history of the Olympic Games. And at the same time, you were learning about the Olympics. I'm sure you also learned some new words in English and all that. We're going to be talking about some more, like say, topics in connection with sports in our next lessons. We'll talk more about the Olympic Games. We'll talk about some of the sports in the Olympic program. We'll talk about our national sport, as I said before. We'll talk about chess, ajedrez. We'll talk about an athlete's sports career. We'll talk about doping. We'll talk about a lot of things that have to do with sports, internationally speaking. So I'm sure you have enjoyed. Why not? I think you have enjoyed our lesson today. I have enjoyed it a lot. I like the topic of sports, as you can see. And again, keep on, learning more about sports. Go to the tabloid. You're going to find there, information about sports. If you haven't found it, if you haven't found the tabloid yet, we're going to let you know soon where you can get it. All right? So don't worry about that. You're going to have the chance to get all this information from the tabloid in the next few days. It's been a pleasure for me to be here, and I wish you a wonderful day. Take care and goodbye.